Hi, everybody. I'm Ellie Powers, and I'm a product manager here on the Google Play team. And as Shannon mentioned, what I'm here to talk about is what's happening in Android development in 2016. It's kind of amazing for me to even say that because, we talk about the Android platform, and it feels so immediate to me. I've been at Google almost 5 years, and when I joined, that platform was very new. It's come a huge way, a very, very long way, and I'm excited today to share with you some of the things that we're most excited about and some of the things that we think that you need to know about as developers in order to make the best apps possible. So Android development is a lot more sophisticated this year than it was back in the past. And that's really important, and it's happening because users have much higher expectations than ever. Users want apps that are innovative, that are highly functional, that are beautiful, and take advantage of all the latest technologies. Now, as a developer, you want to give them all of that. You want to make those great user experiences, but you want to have the least amount of hassle possible. Totally. And that's why you need more sophisticated tools that are going to bring you more power. So today, I'm going to talk about 4 different areas of Android development. First, we're going to talk about the latest Android dessert, Nougat. It's sticky, it's sweet, it might get stuck in your teeth, and it's got a lot of great new features that users are going to love. We're going to talk about what you need to know as a developer. Second, we're going to talk about what's new with material design. It launched a couple years ago, and there's some new things that you should know about. Third, we're going to talk about Android Studio. That's another product that's been progressing a lot. So we're going to talk about how that can help you build better apps. And finally, we had a huge announcement this year at Google I/O about Firebase. Firebase means a lot more this year than it did last year, and we're going to go through a lot of the features that it offers. It's all about building and growing your apps cross-platform, so we're going to talk a little bit more about how that can help you with your overall app business, including Android, but also beyond it. So first, let's talk about Android Nougat. Has anyone here tried Android Nougat so far? Got to build on one of your devices? That's great. So you may have a favorite feature, but I'm going to tell you a few of mine. One of my favorite things about it is the improved battery life. And another one is when you upgrade to a new version and install an update, it doesn't need to go back and optimize all your apps anymore. That's one of my favorite things, especially because I have like 150 apps on my phone. So those are features that are great for users. And now we're going to walk through the things that are most important to know about as a developer. So first up is multi-window. What this means is a user can use their phone or tablet or even TV to do more than one thing at the same time. Now, this can be great for users who like to do things like maybe watching a video of the cooking recipe, demonstrating how to make an item, while looking at the recipe or the shopping list in another screen. So you can look at those 2 activities at the same time. Maybe if you're like me, when you're doing your work email, you also like to watch cat videos at the same time, and so multi-window will help you do that. We find that multi-window works especially well with devices that have much larger screens. I use it on my Nexus 6P and find it works pretty well there. And it's really easy to have this work. It'll start working on your apps automatically by default. You don't actually have to do anything, but in order to make sure it works well, you'll probably want to test out your apps with Nougat in the multi-window mode and just make sure that everything's working well and looking good. And the reason this works so easily is that Android apps and their layouts are so good at adjusting anyway to take advantage of different screen sizes, right? If you open your app on a different size device, it'll adjust automatically. And so with multi-window, a similar thing is happening here. Now, after you've tested it, if you want to make a few tweaks, there are certain parameters that you can change, like things like default or minimum sizing, if you want to make sure it works exactly right. So next up, notifications. Marshmallow had a big notifications overhaul. And in Nougat, we still weren't satisfied, so we decided to do even more stuff. We're going to talk through a few of the important changes. So first up, there's new templates for notifications. Another really important thing is there is a attribution marker. You can see up here, there's a green icon, and it says Hangouts. This way, a user can be sure exactly which app sent that notification. Also, we offer bundled notifications. I use this all the time because I get a lot of Gmail messages, and so with bundled notifications, they all come together as one group, so it's easier for the user to manage those notifications. But my favorite feature with notifications in Nougat is actually these quick actions. If you look at the screenshot in the right, what you can see here is there are these quick action buttons. So if you get a message, you don't actually have to open the app to reply to it. For example, here, I could just click on the reply button or the archive button. And so when I find that I'm running from meeting to meeting, it's really easy for me to send quick messages to my colleagues or friends and family as I'm going through my day. So does anyone here in this room speak multiple languages? Yeah. I had a feeling that this would be a big hit in Europe. I speak one language pretty well, and then two languages pretty badly. And so we think in Europe, this is going to be a pretty popular feature. So the idea is that many people don't speak just one language, they speak more. And so what we allow the user to do is to specify their different languages that they speak and put them in their order of preference. So when a user tries to open an app, Android will try to load the app in the user's first choice language. If that app translation isn't available in that language, they'll load the second choice, the third choice, and so on. So for example, in this case, with this screen here, it would first try to open the app in English. If that didn't work, it would try Spanish. And then as a last resort, it would try French. So as a developer, there shouldn't be anything that you have to do to make this work. It should just work automatically. But we think that you'll like knowing that this is available and that this will help users be able to make sure they're seeing your app in the right language that's right for them. So in Marshmallow, we talked last year about a huge overhaul to the permissions platform. Permissions are now real time as of Marshmallow. But there were a couple things that we wanted to tweak to make them work even better. So has anyone ever had to ask for the permission to access a user's internal storage and it used to pop up a message about, hey, can I access your photos and this and that and a bunch of different things? We had a lot of feedback from developers that sometimes they would only need to access one of these things and gaining access to all of these things was concerning to users. And we thought that that was absolutely great feedback. So what we've done is we've broken it down so that as a developer, rather than requesting access to all of the storage, you can request access to a specific folder. So for example, in this case, maybe this is a photo app, and so it's actually asking to access just the pictures folder. And so this means that a user understands a lot better why what you're requesting is necessary, and also you're not gaining access to other files that you may not need to have access to. So does anyone here in this room work on 3D games? Yeah, a couple folks? That's really cool. So Vulkan is a new technology. It's a low-level, low-overhead, and cross-platform 3D API, and it's also available in Android Nougat as well. So this is a really great technology that helps if you're trying to write games that work cross-platform. It works a lot more similarly across these different platforms. And also, if you use a game engine, a lot of engines are supporting it already or have a platform to be able to support Vulkan in the future. So what this means now with Vulkan being supported in Nougat is if you are using Vulkan, it'll start to work really well on these devices right away. So that was Android Nougat. And now we're going to move on and talk about what's new in material design. So first of all, how many apps here are using material design already? Good number of folks. So if you're using material design, you're actually in really good company. We noticed recently that we have basically 1 million apps on the Play Store that are using material design. And if you haven't heard of it, what material design is a set of principles that govern how apps look, how they move, how they feel. And it's this set of design principles that covers things like tactile surfaces, rich imagery, bold colors, and my favorite, which is meaningful motion. And why material design is important for you as a developer is that when a person uses your app for the first time, you want them to know how it works, right? And if you're already using this material design framework that users understand, it'll be more intuitive to them to understand how to get started with your app. You'll be less likely to have a person who gets confused or lost and doesn't know how to do it. And so if you're looking to reach the over 1.4 billion Android users that are active today, using material design can be a critical part of the process in order to make sure that they're going to know how to get started immediately and stay engaged. So we'll talk about a couple examples of developers here in Europe that are using material design. So first up is Bring from Switzerland, and they implemented material design. Now, if you haven't used the Bring app, it's all about being able to manage multiple shopping lists. And it does things like informing you about what items still need to go in your cart. You can also share your shopping list. So if you have a roommate or spouse who's at the store, you can alert them at the last minute if there's something that they need to pick up from you. So Bring has used material design to implement a consistent toolbar across the different screens in their app. It allows them to keep their most popular features accessible wherever you go. And so they've managed to fit in search, the nav drawer, imagery, and an invite button on this toolbar that's visible throughout their app. And they were pretty happy with how this went because when they launched it, they saw that they had a 66% increase in session times in the 6 months following the launch of the material design revamp. And they also managed to get showcased on the Material Up blog as well. Fabulous is another app. This one's based in Paris. And it's a science-based app that encourages users to adopt a healthy lifestyle. And it does this by developing a personalized step-by-step program for each user. And so in this layout, we can see that they're using cards as well. But in this case, they're using this to help a user organize their habits and their goals. And when you tap on these cards, they elevate. And with the help of icons, they make it really easy for the user to see exactly what they're doing and to understand every action that they're taking. It's a very clear layout, and users have responded really well. So since they did their material redesign in 2015, they've actually had a 10-fold increase in daily downloads. So they've been really happy with this result as well. So let's talk about what's new with material design this year. When we first introduced it, we had some devices that were able to support a lot of advanced, complicated things, but some devices weren't. The great news is that in 2016, on average, devices are just so much more powerful than they were when material was first announced. So we're really encouraging developers this year who want to really set themselves apart from a design standpoint to look at the use of motion. With the higher-end devices, you can support a lot more motion than you could with lower-end devices a couple of years ago. So motion is really powerful because not only can it be fun, can it be amusing, can it really bring charm and character to your brand, but it's also a real usability feature. Using motion in your app can help a user understand as they transition from one screen in your app to the next. Really helps understand the transitions. And, as I mentioned, it's also a great way to bring in fun, delight, and even make your users laugh. So that was what's new with material design in 2016. And now the question is, how do I make this happen? If I want to support the latest Nougat features, bring a great design, and build a wonderful app that's really going to get noticed, how do I do it? And let's talk about Android Studio for that. So is anyone here using Android Studio today? Is anyone not using Android Studio? Cool. Every year we're seeing more and more people using the Studio, and the reason for that, we hope, is that we wanted to build a purpose-focused IDE. We wanted to have something that really was tuned for the languages that Android development is based on and really felt native to the Android platform. And we've really been shocked and humbled by the amount of momentum we've seen on the Android Studio adoption so far. So those of you who said you're using Android Studio, you're in very good company. If we look at the top 125 apps and games on Play, actually 92% of them are using Android Studio. That's been great to see. And of course, millions of developers all over the world are using Android Studio as well. So for those of you who maybe didn't know Android Studio as well, let's take a little bit of time to talk about it and talk about what was new in the past year. So at the beginning of the year, we launched Android Studio 2.0. The main focus here was speed. That was a real key piece of feedback we had from developers. They said, make it faster if you do nothing else. Came back time and time again. So we introduced something called Instant Run. Now the idea here is that you can do swaps of code in real time when you go to run your app. There's not a lot of waiting, and it can push code and resources directly into the app while it's running on your computer. And this also included not just Instant Run, but also major improvements to the emulators. It included a new emulator UI, a GPU profiler view, search deep linking, creation, and building of test cases. We'll talk about those things a little bit later. And then in 2.1, we built that release side by side with the team working on Nougat. So this is all about supporting Android Nougat. So we have support for the new features and APIs, new Nougat emulators to test on, Jack compiler support so that you can try END's Java 8 support, and important stability enhancements. That was something else we heard from you, is that every time we need to update it, we need to make sure it's just really high quality, production grade stuff. And then in 2.1, we also made an additional investment into Instant Run. We moved the DEX in process, and that was a huge accelerator, allowing Instant Run to get even faster than previous incarnations. So of course, now we're looking at Android Studio 2.2. The main focuses there are speed, smarts, and support for Nougat. And so we also have a ton of updates in this release, for everything from Firebase integration to enhanced support from C++. So I'm going to highlight a few things that you should know about in this latest release. So as a developer, one of the best feelings in the world is being in the flow. You finally sort of load up in your brain all of the code that's running, you're working on it, and the last thing you want is to get disrupted, to break that flow when you're waiting for your app to build and run on your machine. So that's why we introduced Instant Run. And we've made progressive improvements since its launch. You can see a lot of the updates here into the speed, and that's really been getting a lot of good feedback, and we're going to keep trying to work on that and improving it even further. We've also seen a big development in the Android ecosystem around C++. When we first started working on Android, we thought that native code was something that was going to be pretty rare, and it was. And then as Android's evolved, we've actually seen more and more developers using C++ for more and more reasons. Initially, it would just be for things like maybe physics simulations, but we've seen over time that more and more types of apps and games are using native code, so we've realized we need to enhance the support for it a lot more. So you can now actually do a whole bunch of more things in C++, and let's walk through a few of them. So we've already supported editing and debugging of native code, but with 2.2, we're bringing you IntelliJ 2016.1. This includes a lot of IntelliJ's enhancements to C++ from the CLion 2016.1 release. And now you can also just run the app like any normal app, Android app, using the run dialog. It's much more integrated into the overall build and run experience. So now this is also integrated with the debugger so that you can set the breakpoint, then run the app, and the debugger will break at the right place, executing the code on your machine. It's just a much more integrated, well-run test, run and build cycle on your machine. So next, I'd also want to tell you a little bit more about the C++ debugger enhancements. So in 2.2, you no longer have to select explicitly whether you want a C++, a Java, or a hybrid debugger. You can just choose auto, and then the IDE will automatically select the right debugger for what you're trying to do. And if you're debugging code in N and above, you can actually just use one debugger for both of these, thanks to our Java-aware C++ debugger. So let's talk about design. You know, we talked a little bit earlier about how users respond so well when you've made your app look great. And Android Studio has introduced a couple of new features to really help you improve this. So first of all, the layout editor. It's a new user interface designer. It helps you quickly design the layouts in your app in a much more visual way, a much more interactive way. And so you don't have to go back and forth so much between coding and previews. We also have some new features. Here you can see the blueprint mode. It's really powerful. And we have a new properties panel also over there, which allows you to quickly edit the layouts and the widgets faster. We've also introduced a new type of layout. It's called constraint layout. Previously, we'd see a lot of developers, when they wanted to achieve a very precise layout, they'd end up nesting a bunch of different layout types inside of each other. It would be very hard to debug, very clunky. We've all probably spent a few hours fiddling with these things, wondering why it never quite lines up right. And so what we've done with constraint layout is it gives you a lot more powerful language to express complex UIs, but you don't have to do this horrible layout nesting anymore. So we think this will really simplify your experience for creating and managing your apps. And together with the layout editor, you'll be able to have a much more powerful and simple way of modifying your layouts. Now, if you do have a tricky layout issue that you can't really figure out, we also have something called Layout Inspector. Now, the idea here is that you can debug a snapshot of your app's layout. You can have it running on your Android emulator, on your computer, or on your Android device. And it gives you tools to inspect the view hierarchy. And you can look at different corresponding attributes to find and fix the layout issues that you couldn't debug a little bit more easily. So another thing that a lot of developers are trying to do is to get more efficient with their apps, not just in how they build them, but also on the binaries that are delivered to users' devices. So the tool that you have that's best for this is called the APK Analyzer. It's really designed to help you keep your app small and efficient. And for those of you who are building apps for emerging markets, places like India, Brazil, and Indonesia, this becomes even more critical as users don't have a ton of storage and also have limited network connectivity. We'll give you a little bit more information about that in the Building for Billions exercise. So APK Inspector can help you figure out which of the different files in your APK are taking up a lot of space. It can also help you do things like avoiding the 64K reference method limit issues with your DEX files. It can help you diagnose ProGuard config issues and inspect complex resources files. It's really to help you analyze every aspect of your APK and get rid of the bloat. Now, one of the other things to note is that the APK Analyzer actually shows you file size in a couple of different ways. First of all, you can see the raw file size, but actually you can also see the download size of various components in your APK. And what is the difference between those? Well, the download size is actually the estimated size that users would actually need to download when the APK is served from Google Play. And that can actually be different from the raw file size. So this information should really help you prioritize where to focus your efforts in reducing app size and make sure that you're doing the highest return on investment there. So let's move on and talk about testing, right? Testing is really critical. The most basic thing that users want is they want your app to work well. And so, you know, writing UI tests can be really tedious, and a lot of developers have this as their least favorite thing to do. And we wanted to make that easier because testing is so critical and so important when you're trying to get a high star rating on Google Play or trying to create an app that users love and will want to come back to. So we created something really new. We created something called the Record Espresso Test UI in Android Studio. So here's what you can do. It's just as easy as using your app. You can run your app, and then Android Studio will actually capture all of your UI interactions, and it'll convert them into a fully reusable espresso test. And then you can run this test locally with Android Studio, maybe using the emulator, or you can actually run it against Firebase Test Lab, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And so if you want to use the recorder, you can just go to the Run menu and select the Record Espresso Test function. So if you have been sort of procrastinating and putting off writing any tests because it's a big pain, which it is, I would highly encourage you to use the Espresso Test Recorder to get started. If you just record a couple simple tests for the most common flows in your app, that can pay off hugely when you're trying to make sure you don't have any regressions of functionality. Also core to testing is having a great local test solution, an emulator, right? And the Android emulator didn't used to be as fast as we wanted it to be. And so users would tell me, developers would tell me, that they spend a ton of time and money trying to source a whole wide range of devices. When I'd go to visit developers in their offices, they would show me a gigantic drawer or maybe even a full closet full of all of the Android devices that they had to buy. Probably a lot of you have one of those closets as well. So we've wanted to try to make this unnecessary, or at least a lot less necessary. So what we've been doing is focusing on improving the emulator. One of the biggest concerns there was speed. We've now improved the emulator so it's actually faster than a physical device. We're really excited about that. And we hope that being able to use more of your testing on emulators will mean that you don't have to spend as much time and money managing your gigantic drawer of Android devices, and you can spend more of your time doing some of the funner parts. Finally, Android Studio is also the easiest way to integrate the suite of Firebase tools that I'm about to talk about. We want to make it easier for you to add services like analytics, authentication, notifications, and AdMob with just a couple clicks in Android Studio. So we've made that a lot easier. OK, so I started talking a little bit about Firebase and how it integrates with Android Studio. But let's talk about actually what Firebase is. So Firebase was a company that Google acquired a couple years ago. And when we acquired them, they were actually mostly like kind of back-end services. And now, at Google I/O this year, we are really excited to announce that Firebase is a lot more than that. Firebase is actually a whole suite of technologies. We've tried to bundle together all of the most important Google developer services and created one cross-platform suite of tools. It used to be if you wanted to use a bunch of different developer services from Google, you had to go to a bunch of different places, multiple SDKs, multiple websites of documentation. It was more complicated than we wanted. But with Firebase, we've combined a bunch of the different components together, single SDKs, centralized hubs of documentation, et cetera. So it's a lot easier for you as a developer to use multiple Google tools together. And one key point to note, Firebase is cross-platform. It'll work fantastic on Android, but we know all of you want to support your app on multiple platforms as well, and so Firebase also works on iOS. So let's talk about the thing that brings together all the different Firebase tools, analytics. It's at the core. Everything you want to do as a developer, you also want to measure and see how it impacts users. So Firebase Analytics product is great about giving you information about how users behave and also where they're coming from when they go into your app. We built it from scratch to support app developers cross-platform. And a lot of people ask us, well, how is it different from Google Analytics? And I think the key thing to know about it is it was built by the same team that built Google Analytics. Firebase Analytics is super optimized for mobile apps, and we think it's a great place to get started if you haven't picked a solution already, or if you're looking at getting a better analytics product for apps and games. So here's an example of what Firebase Analytics can look like with a particular game. And then one of the things we want to do with Firebase Analytics is to make sure that out of the box you get as much information as possible so you don't have to spend a bunch of time duplicating the sorts of things that every developer would want to have. So it's a great way to look at, for example, the usage from your app. You can also do experiments with analytics. And in a lot of cases, you won't even need to do any coding. So for those of you who work at smaller companies, it's really great to set these sorts of things up so that people like product managers and marketing folks can run experiments or get data without always having to ask engineering teams to go and add more code to the app. So that was analytics, and now we're going to zoom in a couple of different parts of the Firebase suite to understand more about that. And we'll start with develop. I've listed a bunch of the different technologies here that Firebase offers. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to talk about them all today, so we're going to focus on a couple things. First up is authentication. One of the most common things developers want users to do in their app is to sign in, because that way you can offer the user a personalized experience that evolves with them as they keep using your app. And so Firebase authentication gives you a bunch of different options. It supports email and password login. It supports Google, Facebook, Twitter, and GitHub sign-in. And if you already have an existing system, it can integrate with those existing user accounts. And Firebase Authentication has an open source library, and it's fully integrated with other Firebase features as well. So just as an example, if you use Firebase Authentication, you can also use it to control access to user data in the real-time database. So Firebase Cloud Messaging, which was formerly known as Google Cloud Messaging, is a cross-platform messaging solution that lets you deliver messages to users in a reliable way with no cost, and also trying to minimize impact on users' battery life. Firebase Test Lab for Android is a great way to catch bugs before you ship your code to users. We talked about this a little bit before, how you can record tests on Android Studio. And Firebase Test Lab, it's really important to know, that's actually running your tests on real physical devices that are located in a data center at Google. Now, if you want to get started with Firebase Test Lab, actually the best way to do it is to go into the Google Play Developer Console. We have something in there called the pre-launch report, which we're actually going to hear a little bit more about later. We definitely encourage you to try the pre-launch report in the Developer Console and to be able to use it with all of your alpha and beta apps. Now, while you may try to catch most of your issues and bugs through testing before the launch, we all know that we're not always 100% effective in this, right? So Firebase Crash Reporting is a great way to find out about issues that are occurring in the field after your launch. So whenever an app crashes, it's reported by Firebase Crash, and the developer can review these in a report. Again, this also works cross-platform, so you can use it across all of your apps. So that was developing an app. And now let's talk about some of the technologies to help grow an app. First up is dynamic links. I was just talking to a developer about this yesterday. A lot of us want to be able to provide a single link that works cross-platform, and also to be able to deep link someone to a page within an app, even if that user had to go through the install flow. And this is really helpful. These links can work across different platforms, and they do carry the URL state after the user has completed the install. And also, they're integrated with Firebase Analytics, so you can also see the activity that's coming in through these dynamic links. And app indexing. This is something we launched a couple years ago. It's integrated with Firebase as well, and this is a great way to be able to take content for your app and surface it to users within Google Search. And also, as users interact with your app, it can also boost your search ranking in Google Search. It also provides things like autocomplete in the search bar, bringing users into the content for your app really easily and directly. And notifications. So Firebase Notifications is a free service. A lot of developers ask me, how can I manage these better? And this is a good solution for it. It gives a simple UI for generating notifications. A lot of the time, you don't even need to write code. You can just use the Firebase Notifications console. So again, this is a great way where if you have multiple people working on your app, even folks who don't do coding on a daily basis can still go in and set up new notifications. So on the client for Android, no coding is needed for background notifications. And if you want to do notifications on iOS or foreground notifications, there's just a little bit of coding required there. Also, you can see, you want to be really sure as a developer that you're not sending too many notifications or having users feel like they're getting spammed. So you can actually look at analytics to be able to track conversion rates on these notifications, so you can understand which ones are effective and which ones might not be as welcome. So that's how to build and grow your app. Finally, the most important part perhaps, earning money. So AdMob is a popular way to be able to monetize your mobile apps through advertising. And now it's been brought together in the same suite of tools to make it a lot easier to integrate with in Firebase. There's a number of different ad formats if you haven't tried AdMob yet. We have video ads, we have native ads, we have interstitial ads, and we're seeing over 1 million apps using AdMob today. And again, it's fully integrated with Firebase. But if you're already using AdMob already, you can still start using it without having to adjust or mess up your existing AdMob configuration. Okay. So that was my talk. Today we talked about what's new in Android development in 2016. First, we talked about Nougat. We talked about our latest version of the Android release. We talked about improvements to the user experience, things like multi-window, multiple languages, notifications, and a couple tweaks to the permissions flow. Next, we talked about material design. It's very quickly becoming the default and the user expectation. We have over 1 million apps using it today. And actually, the thing we want to focus on this year, if you're thinking of refining your material design implementation, is talking about bringing in more motion to make your app easier to use and also to make it a lot more fun and add personality. Third, we talked about Android Studio. We have Instant Run. It's a lot faster to use. but we also have important new features around the areas of design, things like the new constraint layout to help you simplify complex layouts, and also the emulator to help you do testing a lot more quickly. So that's what we learned about in Android development. But I think our biggest announcement for this year was Firebase. This cross-platform suite of tools is really powerful to help you build great Android apps and also great iOS apps. I think a lot of developers are trying to manage multiple apps across multiple platforms, and with Firebase, it's a lot simpler to get all of the best things that you want from Google with a lot less of the hassle. All right.
Okay. All right.